Well, thanks everyone for coming out. This is our first meeting here.
Yes,
So
and thanks to Zoar. I meant to.
we appreciate this a great deal. In a couple of years, I might need an elevator. Here at the chapter, we've had a lot of different topics that we discuss, things that we work on. We work on just about everything. We probably work on more science-based projects than any other chapter in the state, really. But something that has always struck me is that, whenever we're doing something, about the history of the river, a piece of its history, the environment has its history. The dams have their history. We find things that when we're out, looking for bugs, there's a history there. But the one history that we never really looked at is before, our recorded history, what we learned in school. And that is, the native people that lived here, before our ancestors arrived. And it's always struck me that what I've learned, since the nuns didn't teach me any of this stuff, is that some of the stuff I think that we're trying to do now in making the river better is to bring it back to a time when the river was at its best, without the dams. Not so many people, even though, if you go to Boston, Franklin County, it's not even close in terms of population. So in talking to Matt and to Eric, we thought that it would be nice to just, get a real good sense of how people lived, how the river played a role in their lives. And, we're certainly curious about the types of fish they pursued. I'm still arguing with biologists as whether they were actually brook trout in the Deerfield or just the tributaries like now. But I reached out to Okateo and they hooked me up with Dan, and we've been trying to, get a date together, but we've had so many different projects going. It's been tough. So I'm really, really glad that we were finally able to have you, Dan. We really appreciate you coming. So just a little bit of background. I blew it up so I could read it. Dan Shears is an enrolled member of the Nulhegan band of the Nulhegan Abenaki, and if I mispronounce anything, I apologize. He has been a cultural and historical educator at Plymouth Patuxent Museums from 2013 to 2016, and held the title of Men's Technology Supervisor the latter half of those years. He is a bead worker, quill worker, traditional hide tanner, and birch bark artisan. Some of his work can be seen at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center in the Tomaquag Museum. Dan also holds the title of Material Culture Advisor for his tribe's Cultural and Historic Preservation Department. So everyone, let's give a warm welcome to Dan Shears.
Oh, here, Sarah, can you make sure that your camera's pointed at him?
Sure.
Can you see it?
I hope I don't crack your iPad.
No.
Paigwayam ziwi yamani pakwanosian. Ndalawizu kwidalatok. Pat nudziawi nalhiganek. What I just said to you in my indigenous language is, hello everyone, it's nice to see you. Thank you for having me here today. I titled my presentation, Indigenous Relationships to the Pakumpitetwa, or the Deerfield River. In my conversations with Mike, I did tell him that I don't particularly personally like to do formalized speaks or talks like this, only because I feel that in my experience, both at Plymouth Plantation and also doing living history, that a more casual atmosphere, you folks will retain a lot more of what we discuss rather than me standing up here and talking at you. I don't know how long this is going to be. I hope I'm not too nervous and rush through it. So I don't know if my talk is going to be a half an hour or 45 minutes. We'll see. Also, the Deerfield in and of itself is a little difficult to talk about in terms of our culture because it wasn't one of the major river systems like the Connecticut or anything like that. So some of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is related to the Deerfield River, but more common to places like the Connecticut and other areas that were the main fishing villages. So the word, again, like I mentioned, for the Deerfield River is Pocumpituk, or what most of you probably are familiar with is Pocumtuck. And that refers to a narrow, swift river, or it's possibly interpreted or translated into a clear or open stream. Traditionally, Native folks, we consider everything in nature as our relative, and not objects or resources, even though nowadays in modern language, especially when it comes to things like things on the tribal website, you'll hear us use the term resources like that. But traditionally speaking, we didn't look at things in nature as a resource, a commodity, or anything like that. Those are our relatives, and they are here for us. We use them for things like if we happen to be sick, we look to things in nature to help us feel better. And we cannot do that if we don't have that type of relationship with them. And if it's only something that we see as an object, then what they're put here for does not help us. Some of you may have heard the term water is the source of life, or water is life. That cannot be any more farther from the truth. I do not understand and at all how any of the corporate organizations can just dump things into the river without having some kind of consequence to that. Everything, including us, needs water to survive. Why would we do those things? I don't understand. The rivers in and of themselves, one way to look at it is a little bit opposite from what the colonial interpretation of it is. If you look at the Connecticut River, it divides New Hampshire and Vermont, but we don't look at it as a division. These were our highways. They were what connected our communities. So from the mouth of the Connecticut all the way down to the ocean, these were our highways. We always took canoes, whether they be birch bark canoes or the dugout canoes, down these rivers to meet with other indigenous communities. I'm reminded of my years at Plymouth Plantation. We always talked about Samoset, who was one of the indigenous leaders up in Nulhegan Island up in Maine, being down in Wampanoag territory. There's no way that that would have happened if we weren't and didn't have some sort of ancient diplomacy with our Wampanoag cousins. So places like the Connecticut, which our word for the Connecticut River is Quinitok. That's our Abenaki word for that river, means long tidal river. Again, these were our highways. Also, the large lakes, like up in my community, up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, Lake Memphremagog. That was one of our highways up into Canada. The St. Lawrence River is also one of the larger rivers that also connected communities. Lake Champlain, which is also in between Vermont and New York, was another way up into Canada via the Richelieu River. Sometimes the confluences of rivers were also areas where we all would congregate and exchange ideas and cultural values and things like that. To some degree, that was also known to colonial folks. And I'm not sure if it's one of those things that they learned from us, or if it also existed in their culture as well at the time. But if you think back into places like Crown Point, Fort Ticonderoga, and Fort Niagara, these were places that many different Native nations all congregated for trade and things like that. Fort number 4 on the Connecticut River in New Hampshire was also one of these places. Fort Pitt in Western Pennsylvania, the confluence of the Allegheny, the Ohio, and the Monongahela rivers. If you look at the map, it's right there on the point. And also further south and southeast, Fort Ligonier was also on the Loyalhanna Creek. So this idea that being near the river is where we have the highways in order to get supplies to and from different areas. I'm going to read a little section from a document that our historical department put out. I have a couple of copies on the table over there that you guys can take a look at if you would like. So the title of this section is Abenaki Fishing Technology. And I will also say there's one word in here from our language that I have not heard back from my language teacher, and I'm not even going to come close to pronouncing it and embarrass myself. Mike, you did a wonderful job pronouncing things earlier. So the Abenaki word for fishing is omawagon. The root om means to lift. Fishing techniques varied depending on species of fish, the time of year, and whether it was being done on a river, waterfall, lake, or ocean. Large-scale fishing was performed primarily in 2 ways: stone dams or wooden weirs. In some cases, the wooden weirs were combined with the stone dams, providing a solid foundation for the wooden stakes and interwoven brush. These fish dams were used for the harvesting of anadromous fish, which spawn upstream in the spring, such as shad, salmon, alewives, herring, and lamprey. They would also be used for catadromous, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I bet, species such as eels, which swim downstream in the fall to spawn in the ocean. According to Frank Speck, when the lightning bugs begin to appear in June, it is the time to start salmon spearing. Camps would be established just above the falls to spear the fish as they came by. And we can talk a little bit later about certain things that we look at too in nature for these activities, especially when it comes time to plant. At other times, fish were speared from the bow of a canoe. This can also be done at night with the use of torches. And this is the section where that word is, and I'm going to skip over that. They were made from birch bark rolls and a stave of green wood splint, split at the end to hold the rolls of birch bark, which would have been set on fire. The light of the torch attracts the fish to the top of the water, and this is particularly true with sturgeon fish. So oftentimes, like I said, we have those lanterns, if you will, or torches hanging off the bows of our canoe. And I'm sure you're all aware of the thick scales that sturgeon have on their back. Well, they would see that light in the water and come up close and actually turn their bellies upside or up towards the water. And we were able to spear them that way and then bring them into shore. Fish harvested at these locations of the fishing camps would then be processed nearby by smoking, drying, salting, or a combination of these preservation methods. According to Daniel Gookin in 1792, he said, quote, "They frequently boil fish and flesh of all sorts, either new taken or dried, as shads, eels, alewives, or a kind of herring, or any other sort of fish. But they dry mostly those sort before mentioned. These they cut in pieces, bones and all, and boil. They separate the bones from the fish in the eating thereof," end quote. So as mentioned earlier, these fishing activities were carried out at certain times of the year, and the rivers connected one community to another. So the well-known fishing locations, such as Amoskieg Falls, and I'm sure most of you pronounce it Amoskeg Falls, but in our language, the word for fish is namasak. So I pronounce it Amoskieg. So Amoskieg Falls in New Hampshire, Kitsipantikuk, or Bellows Falls, which translates to the Great Falls up in Vermont, or Peskiumskut, which is just down the road. That's translated roughly as the Split Rock Place in Turner's Falls. These were the large places where everyone congregated to gather the fish. And Peskiumskut was also known as a refuge for Native peoples after King Philip's War. So not only were Pecumtuck and Nipmuc people here, but also Abenaki people. We had Wampanoag and Narragansett refugees up here in this area as well. I'd also like to mention here that these activities that were done at certain times of the year, I refer to them as seasonal movements or seasonal rounds rather than nomadic lifestyle, as a lot of the early ethno-historians always used to say. And to unfortunate some degree, they still do. Even our own indigenous folks will use the term, we were nomadic back in that day. We were people, we are people. We are not animals. We did not migrate. We did not wander around aimlessly or anything like that. So at these locations, there were other activities besides the harvesting and drying of fish that were happening as well. Depending on the season, cattails and bulrush were harvested for making of mats. If you ever get down to Plymouth Plantation, where I used to work, or what the heck do they call it now, Plymouth Patuxet? Those folks, for their summer homes, would make the coverings for the houses out of cattail mats. And the interior houses, like in the wintertime, the mats on the sides of the walls would be made out of bulrush. So, but those would be harvested in the springtime. Certain areas of the river had clay deposits that we would use for our pottery. I have a couple examples of our clay pots for you guys to look at later. We also made ceramic pipes out of the clay. Roots like the cattail and groundnuts were also harvested at this time. But there were also social activities like singing and dancing that was also happening, and also to some degree ceremonial activities. One of the social activities might have been, you may have met a potential spouse at one of these gatherings. Now, in my case, oh, good Lord, in my case, I did not meet my girlfriend at a powwow or a social or any kind of social activity. She is Italian. And if you didn't see her walking with me, she's the one turning all kinds of shades of red in the back. When I started dating her, no one warned me that there were certain things that came along with dating Italian women. Okay. One of them, well, I should back up a little bit. I should say, some of you may have thought maybe we may have met at the end of a spaghetti noodle like they did in Lady and the Tramp, but that didn't happen either. We knew each other in high school, even though she barely talked to me in high school. And eventually years went on and we grew up and grew apart, went our own separate ways. But then as adults, we periodically met each other in public in passing, and she always would shoot me the googly eyes. And eventually I acquiesced and we started dating. Now this is where those things that I really wish someone would have warned me about when you started dating. One of the things is the cheese drawer in my refrigerator exploded. What went from one bag of cheese went to many different varieties of cheese. Munster cheese, Sharp cheese, Vermont Sharp, some species of cheese I've never even heard of. Then, when she started coming around more often and decided to cook for me, I thought I would help out. That was a bad idea. One night we decided to have spaghetti. Now, no one told me that you do not ever, ever break in half the spaghetti noodles. My mother is both French and Abenaki. This is how I grew up. I didn't think anything of it. So with the pot of water on the stove, I break the pile of noodles, throw them in the water, and I hear a gasp. No one told me that that's a mortal sin.
What were you thinking?
Apparently, there's also oil and seasoning that goes into the water as well, and you have to wait for it to boil. Again, I just threw it in there and figured it would just cook at some point anyway. Well, she chased me out of the kitchen and never allowed me back in. Anyways, I'm getting a little off topic. We did not follow the solar calendar. We had a lunar calendar, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard the old stereotype of the old native storyteller saying many moons ago. That's because we followed the moon. That was our calendar. So the month of May, we called Kikas or Kia Kizos, the earth working, field maker, or planting moon. Also, things in nature that we would look for is the shadbush blooming, the oak leaves getting the size of a squirrel's ear. These are the things that we would look for that would tell us, okay, now it's time, it's safe from the morning frosts. Now we can start to plant. And the typical way that we did this was to mound up the dirt to about a 2.5 foot mound. And we would plant not only corn, but beans and squash as well. And some of you may have heard the term Three Sisters. That's kind of a stereotype, so to speak. A lot of us here in New England have borrowed that term from our Haudenosaunee relatives in New York. I'm more than convinced that each of our communities here had our own term for that whenever we spoke that our languages regularly. I don't know what that is anymore, but now everybody calls it Three Sisters. But our Wampanoag relatives on the Cape would use the fish, such as the herring, for fertilizer, versus folks up here, normally we take advantage of the flooding of the river in the springtime that would deposit all the silts and sediments from the bed of the river up on top. So that's how we would utilize that in our planting. We didn't have to fertilize it with fish. But not only did we plant corn, beans, and squashes in our fields, we also planted Jerusalem artichokes and sunflowers. And the Haudenosaunee folks in New York also planted cantaloupes as well. Here in Charlemont, we're just outside of the Connecticut River watershed. But again, this is one of the areas that, like I just mentioned, we would utilize our planting fields right near the river so that we would take advantage of the silt and everything coming up from the riverbed in the spring times. The Wampanoag folks, and to some degree, indigenous folks over here also, to get their fields ready for planting, would use a controlled burn to get rid of the weeds and things like that were left over from the winter. And also certain areas of the woods would also be burnt over in order to clear out the underbrush to make it easier for travel, but also to promote the growth of new plants to attract game like deer, bear, and moose. So, in closing, I again would like to thank Mike and Trout Unlimited for having me, everyone for coming and listening, and I hope that you learned something you didn't know. And if you have and possibly you would have a little bit more appreciation for our collective history here in this area that we all call home. Uli Wani, thank you. We can do a formal Q&A, or everyone can feel free to check out the stuff that I brought with me. And I'm very happy to answer questions then, but I'm here all night. Well, not all night, but yes, Rhonda.
You still break spaghetti.
When she's not looking. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how is it that you're able to preserve and transmit indigenous languages? It's gotta be very difficult.
Yeah, especially when a lot of it had not been practiced for a very long time. So it varies from community to community. A lot of the Wampanoag folks that I know, a lady by the name of Jessie Littledoe Beard actually was trained as a linguist, and she used the which Bible was it? Okay, so that Bible was used to translate into, well, it was translated into Wampanoag, but she used that resource to help her to revitalize the language. I know my language teacher was taught by Cecile Abumsawin from Odanak, a lot of the language, but he also went further, was able to get a hold of old documents that also were written in Abenaki and things like that. So it really depends on which community.
Yeah.
So.
The Bible that was translated to Wampanoag, you met the linguist who worked on that?
Oh yeah, I know her personally. Yep.
Was that the translating the Bible in the first place? Was it for probably schools or forced integration or something?
To some degree. So it was originally translated into Wampanoag to convert them to Christianity.
Yeah.
In some cases, it was a forced conversion, but there were other cases that folks really just converted anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of our cousins from Odanak had converted to Catholicism.
Yeah.
So in some instances, it wasn't always forced,
No,
but
no, I think that's just a kind of beautiful re-engineering of that specific, because that was a very specific time where that would have been.
Yeah, and I find it funny because a lot of being in the historical department, I have my nose in a lot of period sources all the time, and I always have to look at that and read between the lines, because these are things written by folks outside of our culture with their own opinions, biases, misunderstandings, flat out racism, all that stuff. So I have to read that and take that with a grain of salt and see, well, what are they looking at? Is this really what they're describing that they're looking at? Is it literal? But that's when I have to not only start with the period sources, but then I also have to pair it with either oral history or hopefully museum artifacts that have survived as well. So taking all of those things into consideration, then I have to make some type of educated guess as to what this certain object or thing is being described at that time.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
What were the Massachusetts nations, would they interact with the Wabanakis of Maine on the Penobscot, Androscoggin, Kennebec River? Was there
Oh, that's
relationship?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know how old those diplomatical relationships go back. But like I was mentioning earlier, when I used to work at Plymouth Plantation, we always were teaching and talking about when Samoset had come down from Maine and was the first native person to greet the English in their own language. So the only way that he would have been in that area is to have had some sort of diplomatical relationship with Wampanoag folks. And that's also why I don't buy the Bering Strait theory, because to my knowledge, and Rhonda, correct me if I'm wrong, I have not found or heard of one archaeological artifact in the Bering area at all. I am a huge advocate of folks getting in canoes and going down the ocean and meeting people that way. Yes, Rhonda.
We have archaeological evidence of the same communities in Alaska going back 20,000 years.
In the Bering Strait?
Bering Straits. We're talking like interior and Beaufort Sea coastal.
Okay.
So yeah, more or less. But I agree with you. There's no way that people would have walked that distance in ever-changing ecological nature, trying to find food, sustenance, harsh weather. That's not happening. If there was any travel at all, and let me just remind folks that I'm a Nukbat Athabaskan from Alaska. We've been here since time immemorial, right? So saying that we came from somewhere else, that's a colonizer lens. We didn't come from somewhere else. But people who did come here probably would have come through the Pacific trade winds or whatever, the Pacific Ocean. Pretty gentle waters, sustainable food. It's been done back and forth from South America to Easter Islands.
Yeah.
Pretty handily. I have man up here in Row, read boats. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The Bering Strait theory is hogwash, and we still live here as a movie from PBS that documents Jesse Little Dover.
Well, that's right. I forgot about that. Yep.
Can you repeat that? I didn't understand that.
We still live here
Okay,
by PBS.
great.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think that you said you were a birch bark canoe. Did I see that in the?
A birch bark artisan, maybe, is what you're thinking? Yep.
Do you build canoes and?
I haven't gone that far yet. I make baskets.
Okay.
That's my main thing that I do with birch bark. I have made a couple earrings with birch bark. This is thinner pieces of bark. But my main activity with birch bark is making baskets.
Did they use birch bark canoes in Massachusetts or?
I think it depends. Well, I can't really speak too much for Massachusetts. I know we have in our community, we've documented a lot of the dugout canoes in both New Hampshire and Vermont. That's another one of our documents that we have in the historical department. But we had a mix of both birch bark and dugout canoes. I'm not entirely sure if. Go ahead. Yeah.
Documented machines in Massachusetts that are about 16,000 years.
That are birch bark?
No.
Oh, he was asking about birch bark canoes in Massachusetts. Yeah.
I think that was more here, right?
I think I personally, until I'm, I see different evidence. I think it was more so the dugout machines than the birch bark, because further down, especially down the Cape, you hardly ever see birch bark at all. So, yeah.
Century documents that Lisa put in they talk about dugouts,
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, thanks very much, Dan. Did somebody have a question? I didn't want to cut you off.
you know what podunk means and
I did at one point. It's in our files to the department somewhere. I know that because we've done workshops at Nawashi Village in Connecticut. And that's Podunk area.
Yeah.
So I know at one point it's crossed my path. I don't remember off the top of my head what that means. So
And I've heard that like the Squanicook River means a place where you catch salmon. Do you?
So one of the things that you have to realize is a lot of the terms now, like for instance, Pecumtuck. That's an anglicized word of what our original word was for either the river or the area. So Pecumtuck comes from Pecumpituk. That's what the original indigenous name for the Deerfield River is. And so that got anglicized into Pecumtuck. Yes, sir.
Talk about some of the,
Oh yeah, we can go over there and you guys can check out everything, and I can talk a little bit more about that too, sure.
All right, well, first of all, I want to thank Dan. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming out.